You just see Ferrari red bread and Max Verstappen meat and cheese. That's the sandwich. And
it's like prime idiot sandwich.
It's chaos, but it's Singapore. Welcome back to Gravel Trap F1.
I'm Cristina.
I'm Caroline.
Singapore brought the heat and the excitement.
It started off slow, but ended with all of us on the edge of our seats.
But you might have noticed at the start of the race, Lance Stroll was missing.
And in today's formation lap, we'll discuss how his crash and Parc Fermé led to that.
In the Grand Prix, we head to 2008, the first ever Singapore Grand Prix, the infamous Crashgate.
At the Checkered Flag, I found out that there's an Am I the Asshole section for F1 on Reddit, and the stories are amazing, so we'll be discussing them.
Let's get into it, because I can't wait. Alrighty, Roo. Let's get into the formation lap, which Lance Stroll did not get to participate in this week because he fuck smashed his car into a barrier.
I'm sorry, what?
You know,
the Gunther Steiner quote.
The Gunther Steiner quote.
Oh.
Yes. He fuck
She didn't just pull that out of nowhere. We're starting a bit pretty racy today here at Gravel Trap. We're just going right in. We said this is not the F1 Kids broadcast. Here we go.
This is not for the kids.
Could you imagine if they ever put Gunther Steiner on the F1 Kids broadcast? If they ever interviewed him, can you imagine how crazy that would be?
He'd have to be so filtered. Anyway, Lance Stroll crashed and he damaged his car quite heavily. And he did inevitably end up not racing just due to feeling very shaken and stirred, but also partially because there are so many time constraints placed on the teams, especially post-qualifying to the start of the race, that it would have been a really big challenge for them to fix the car. And all of those regulations are tied together in a neat little word we're quite all familiar with, Parc fermé. And that is actually two words, and in French it means closed park. And for Formula One and for most motorsports in general, it just is talking about either a specific area, like post-race, we see all the cars put into their little corral there, or it's talking about a group of regulations that are dictating what work can and cannot be done on a car, because the whole purpose of it is just to make sure that whatever car and its setup that you had during qualifying is what you have during the race. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. We're keeping the setup where it is. Were you gonna ask a question or were you just breathing, Caroline?
I was just breathing, but I had a question in my brain. It's like you read my mind. That's wild. I was like, should I ask this question? I don't know. That's crazy.
You could ask.
She heard my brain breathe, guys. What does that mean for Lance then when he crashed?
Point one is that the teams have to say, hey, this is what we have to fix on the car. And they submit that to the FIA and their technical delegate, because each car has a technical delegate that's like staring them down, kind of being like, I'm watching you, because you don't want a team to, get shifty eyes and to think, nobody's watching. I can sneak this little upgrade in here. Sure. We don't want that. We want things to be fair and even. And just like any sports where there's a ref, fixing up a car is part of the game. So they have an official there watching. So first they have to submit. The team has to say, hey, this is the list of things we have to fix. And sometimes it'll be a very specific list. And sometimes it'll just be like everything, the car. Yeah. And I have a feeling it was one of those times where they were just like, you saw it, right?
Yeah.
Everything. So they would submit a list of parts, including the fact that they have to get permission to replace the survival cell. And that's the main monocoque that everything is attached to, and that keeps the driver safe, which is why Lance is fine. But then the other thing that it means for the team, and kind of the big difficulty, is that teams have to seal their cars starting 2 hours after qualifying. And they can only unseal them and start work on them 5 hours before the formation lap. So that's 7 hours to get the car back, to get everything reattached onto their spare survival cell, because don't forget, they're not allowed to have a spare backup car just ready to go. They can have a survival cell that's attached, has like very specific items connected to it, but it's very bare bones. Like they're allowed to have like 6 different small pieces attached to it, kind of a thing. I could actually probably pull up the full list of what that is, but it's they're not allowed to do much of anything. So that was one of the reasonings, or probably part of the decision making for Lance not to race at all, is, you know, he's not feeling great, but also would they have had time to actually fully assemble that car with that time constraint?
When I had that thought too, like how much of the car are they really going to be able to fix? And I had the thought, at what point did they decide that Lance was not going to be racing the next day? And how much of the car had they fixed before they made that decision? Because I was like, I feel bad for all those mechanics if they were busting their booties like they do, because they work really hard on these teams to get this car right. And then it's like, for medical reasons, he's not going to race, which I think was the right call. I do. I'm not saying he should have raced.
That was a hard hit.
But no, yes, it was. But I just had the thought, I was like, how much of the car did they fix before they made that call? I don't know.
Do they not have a reserve?
They're not allowed to use their reserve. I'm glad you brought up the question, because I was also going to bring it up.
Yes.
So in order to race a reserve, they have to participate in a session before the actual race. They have to have driven on the track. If not, they're not allowed to bring in a reserve. So basically, if your driver gets injured at a convenient point in the weekend, a la Daniel Ricciardo, you can have your reserve driver hop in for a practice session and qualifying. It's not the same as an IndyCar. In IndyCar, it's the car that has qualified, not the driver. In Formula One, the driver has to qualify with the car. They're a team.
My husband asked me that question this weekend, and I said, Christina's told me this answer before. Here it is.
I have.
Yes.
Amazing. I had to go in and dig on this the other day, because somebody like very pointedly was like, but what about curfew? Like, can't they ask for an exception for curfew? Curfew and Parc fermé are 2 separate regulations. Curfew covers the times that they're allowed to work on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. On Saturday to Sunday, there's no curfew, so teams can work as long as they want, but they have to do it within the constraints placed on them by Parc fermé. So like their media people can live stream deep into the night, or whatever it is they do, make those funny little edits of, I don't know, I don't really know what their media people do. I imagine it's the same nonsense I do.
Well, and it begs the question, let's just say, hypothetically, if Lance had crashed on Friday and wasn't feeling well, did they have a reserve there? I don't even know if Felipe Drugovich was there.
I think Stoffel was there.
Okay.
I want to say Stoffel was there, because it's horrible, but at some point or another, someone who wasn't aware who Stoffel was, that he was actually a driver, I believe it was on TikTok, said that he was like, who's this hot mechanic?
I'm dead.
And then people on Twitter have been roasting this person, like a screenshot being like, how do you not know who Stoffel Van Dorn is? And I'm like, you do realize this is like your hyperfixation, and some people are casual with this. You're the abnormal one, y'all. It's not normal to know as much as we do.
That's so true. That's so true.
Back it up a bit.
Well, thanks for teaching us about Parc fermé today.
Nailed
it. My best French accent. You're welcome, everyone.
But one of these days, I'm going to commandeer the checkered flag and just bring you guys more and more redonkulous French words.
I love it.
And see how you do.
Well, for today's Grand Prix segment, we, of course, as per usual, are going to take a look at some history at Singapore. And while it's not extensive history, there's still history to be had, because I feel like something always happens at Singapore.
From the first round.
Every time. I kid you not. I feel like that should be the tagline of Singapore. Something always happens. We don't know what it is, but it's something, and it always happens. But we first started to see Formula One-esque style of racing in 1961 in Singapore. While it was not Formula One itself, it was actually called Formula Libre, and also Australian Formula 2, raced in
Okay.
1961. It was known as and I know this is not politically correct, but it is historically what it was called, people. So I'm prefacing with that. It was called the Orientier Grand Prix. It was located at the Thomson Road Grand Prix circuit, and it's a street circuit in Singapore, not the same as the Marina Bay, because it was hosted on Thomson Road, hence Thomson Road Grand Prix circuit. But it hosted, as I said, Formula Libre and Australian Formula 2, not Formula 1. It was renamed to the Singapore Grand Prix in 1966, which is kind of what helped inspire what we now know as the Singapore Grand Prix for Formula 1. It was actually the reason it wasn't called that before was because before then, Singapore had not become a sovereign country. It became a sovereign country in 1965. And so with it starting in 1961, they couldn't really call it the Singapore Grand Prix because Singapore wasn't really a sovereign country. So the event was then discontinued after 1973, and a variety of reasons as to why have kind of been suggested, but a couple of the reasons were an increase in traffic, the high danger and unsuitability of the track, and the inconvenience of having to close the roads for the event and fatal accidents during 1972 and 1973, because remember, they had just become a sovereign state. So you're asking a new sovereign state to close down a bunch of roads for an event.
I mean, you ask an old sovereign state to do that, and sometimes
Seriously.
it even doesn't go well.
That's the truth. That is the truth. But let's fast forward a little bit to the 21st century. And in 2007, there was an agreement made that in 2008, a 5-year deal was going to be signed by Singapore GP PTE Limited and the Singapore Tourism Board and our boy Bernie Ecclestone.
Bernie.
They were announcing that in 2008, a 5-year deal was going to be signed called the Singapore Grand Prix. The race was held at, yep, you guessed it, Marina Bay Street Circuit. Excuse me. The race was actually co-funded by the government of Singapore, who covered $90 million out of the total $150 million it took to put on the Grand Prix. Yeah, they fronted
so many dollars.
They fronted
in the
a
early
lot of it.
2000s. That's so many dollars.
Yes, they were very excited.
Is that accounting for inflation, or is that back in the day money?
So you also have to remember 2008 was when, I mean, I know in America it was when we saw the housing crisis. So there was a lot going on in America in 2007, 2008. So I don't know what it looked like internationally. I don't know what it looked like in Singapore, but I know that it was $90 million out of the total $150 million that it took to put on the show. But don't worry, it sold out. They had all kinds of packages and features, and it honestly probably felt a little bit like what it was like when they did Miami last year and doing Vegas this year. I mean, like, they pulled out all the stops. They had a fashion show after the race that was like there. It was a whole thing. So it sold out, and it was the first nighttime event in F1 history, which I thought was pretty interesting. That's pretty late in the game of F1. 2008 was the first nighttime event we saw. And
jeez.
Yeah, I know, which is kind of nuts to think about. Yeah. But
that is wild.
That wasn't the only crazy stuff that happened at the 2008
Wait.
Singapore Grand Prix.
Where was it? I had a note somewhere of how many light bulbs they had to use for the first one. Let me see if I can find it.
So for the first one, yes, for the first one, they used these like projector like screens and light bulbs to try to light up the circuit.
Philips.com, and you might know Philips from having their name slapped on almost every light bulb in your house, I bet.
Ah, yes.
They were the ones who lit the first Singapore Grand Prix. They partnered with someone named Valerio Maioli, and
sounds like a sauce.
1,500 lighting projectors placed 14 meters apart, lighting only from one side of the track, and to achieve a daylight-esque amount of lumens.
2008 was a very exciting year, not only because it was the first Singapore Grand Prix for Formula 1, but because there was so much that happened even within the race. While we had so many things happening outside of the race, for those that know a little bit about their F1 history, know what happened in 2008. For those that don't worry, we're going to tell you. And in In 2008, Felipe Massa was driving for Ferrari, and he started on pole, which sounds very familiar to this past weekend. Yes. However, it didn't end the same way as it did this past weekend because Felipe Massa did not win. 2008 had a very tight title fight. Also not like what we saw this year. But tight title fight, which you might know a little bit about from seeing some headlines this year because Felipe Massa is still talking about it. But we won't go there. So Fernando Alonso, who we all know and love, went on to win the Singapore Grand Prix in 2008. However, it was a bit controversial because it was later discovered that the Renault team, which is the team that he was driving for in that race and that year, ordered their other driver, Nelson Piquet Jr., emphasis on the junior, don't want to get our timelines mixed up, Nelson Piquet Jr. was told by the team to crash intentionally, allowing for a safety car that was oh so incredibly advantageous for his teammate Fernando Alonso. Coincidence? I think not. So for those that don't remember, obviously, the truth was revealed and they were suspended for a time and it was dealt with accordingly. But it did cast a slight, that is kind of how Singapore is remembered in a lot of ways as the infamous Fernando Alonso Crashgate. Yes. For those that have heard of it by its street term, Crashgate, this is the one. This is the one. This would be Crashgate, 2008, Singapore. Rah, rah. But Singapore has always been a location that brought a lot of emotion, drama, and incredible stories for Formula One. I'm not going to go into them all because I could tell you one from every single year that it's been there. So if you haven't yet, go back. But I will say in particular, if you haven't, go back and watch the 2017 Singapore Grand Prix because the start.
That's the one I watched this week.
Yeah, the start was crazy, and you'll see some really familiar faces and names. And it was an important year for our friend Sebastian Vettel and for the team Ferrari because he had only 3 points separating him and Lewis Hamilton for, once again, a very close title spot.
Why is it always Ferrari here?
It is. Ferrari seems to have quite a history here at Singapore. So does Red Bull, and so does Mercedes. Yeah. It's kind of their domain. But anyways, Sebastian Vettel had only 3 points separating him and Lewis Hamilton for the title spot going into the Singapore Grand Prix. Once again, we have a Ferrari starting on pole with Sebastian Vettel. I'm starting to notice a trend. And his teammate was behind him, which was Kimi Räikkönen, and Max Verstappen, a much younger Max Verstappen, was behind him. Not quite in the rocket ship we see today, but that's all right. At the start, a first corner collision between Sebastian Vettel and Kimi Räikkönen and Red Bull's Max Verstappen led to the retirement of all three drivers. And if you get a chance to go back and look at it, it honestly looks like a poor Max Verstappen sandwich. I mean, you just see just Ferrari red bread and Max Verstappen meat and cheese. That's the sandwich. And
it's like prime idiot sandwich.
It's chaos, but it's Singapore. So something's got to happen in Singapore. And Vettel's title, it was a big deal for Sebastian Vettel because, again, he had those 3 points separating him and Lewis Hamilton, who was not in the sandwich. And so Lewis Hamilton took full advantage, went on to win the race from 5th on the grid, and extended his championship lead over Vettel from 3 points to 28. And at that point, hope started to be lost. But yes, Singapore was one of the races that was canceled due to COVID in 2020 and 2021 due to government and international regulations, but finally returned again last year when we saw Checo Perez take the win for Red Bull. Fun fact, at one time, Kevin Magnussen held the fastest lap at Singapore from being in a Haas. However, unfortunately, that came to a close this year because with the track changes, it did shave off about 10 seconds, causing it to be much faster. And so Kevin's record has been replaced. But man, What a source of pride. And what a minute trivia question that was for a long time. That was like, who holds the fastest lap in Singapore? Because I bet you won't guess it. It was K-Mag in the Haas.
A very popular discussion topic online on the website Reddit is a segment called Am I the Asshole? Or AITA.
Interesting. The old Reddit. Ye old Reddit.
Incidentally, I took a peek. There are some articles there about F1.
Amazing.
And I thought we could look at some of these articles, or these stories from individuals inquiring whether or not they are the asshole, and get your take on those particular ones.
Oh my goodness!
So
buckle up.
The first headline is, "Am I the asshole for wanting to watch F1?"
No, never.
That's not the whole story.
Oh, I'm like, what?
That's just the title.
That's like an insult. That's an insult to all of our listeners. That's just an insult to all of us.
So the story goes, a gentleman and his fiance were going to take their dog for a walk and spend the day out on a race day. And they had planned their whole day together. And the race was at 2:00. And he said, as long as we can do all this stuff and go to lunch and be back by 2, it'll be great because I want to watch the race. And she says, okay, great. I'll be ready at this time and we'll head off and do those things. He goes for a jog, comes back from his jog, and she's not ready. And she says, nope, we have to clean the house. The house is dirty. We have to clean the house. And he's before we go. So he agrees. He says, yeah, the house is dirty. It'll tighten our timeline a bit, but sure. So he goes and helps, and they get the house ready, and they're about to leave. And he's like, this is really tight timeline here. I don't know if we can make it all, but I guess worst case scenario, I'll just watch the first few laps on my phone at the pub, and then I can just watch the highlights later. And that compromise apparently didn't fly with the fiance. It caused a row. She got very upset and accused him of wanting to, watching live sports was more important than spending time with her. And it went back and forth. And he wants to know, is he the asshole for wanting to watch F1?
It sounds like there might have been some other extenuating circumstances that might have led to some of the tension. Because in his defense, there was prior communication that this was a priority for him. And they did the time spending together stuff before the F1 watching. And so I have to say, purely because he communicated beforehand, hey, I'd like to watch this at 2:00. So what do you want to do between now and then? That's why I think he's fine. Yeah. But again, I'd love to hear her side of the story.
That's always the thing, is that yeah, there are some of these where you're looking at it sideways and being like, we're not getting the full story, or we're getting a very distorted version of the story. And every once in a while you get one where you're just like, overall, you're probably an asshole, but in this situation, no. So, in this specific weekend, definitely not the asshole. Straight up.
Yeah.
You said you wanted to watch this, and she's kind of a butt munch for not, being respectful of him and his interests. This is a time-sensitive one,
The consensus of the commenters was that he's not an asshole.
Yeah.
And based on the fact that she pulled a last-minute change and said, oh, no, we're not leaving now. We have to clean the house. And the fact that she didn't accept his compromise, which I thought was a extremely gracious compromise, to be like, I'll just watch 10 laps on my phone and then the highlights later. That was immense to me. There's something bigger in their relationship other than, and that's what everyone seems to think, is this isn't about the racing. This is a bigger thing. Yeah.
That was my first thought. There's something else.
Story number 2. Am I the asshole for refusing to watch F1?
Probably.
43-year-old female says, my husband, 54-year-old male, came out as a Formula One fan 4 years ago. As if
as if that's a traumatic experience.
Was he closeted for a while and then came out?
I didn't realize we needed to have events where we announce ourselves.
Gotta have a
F1
team
fans.
support reveal.
Was it new or had it been a secret for most of their marriage?
What?
They've been living together for 9 years, and for the first 5, apparently, he kept it a secret.
How?
He's been trying to get me into it, but the thing is, I don't like racing cars, and I can't stand the noise or even the commentator's voice on TV. In my time zone, it's on in early mornings, and I don't like watching TV before lunch. His daughters, who are in their late teens and from a previous marriage, started supporting the sport, and they watch it together Sunday morning in the family room. I find it a cute father-daughter's bonding thing, and they know I won't participate in it because my dislike hasn't changed over the time despite his efforts. Cue to today, early morning in a cold winter Sunday, Southern Hemisphere. Daughters are not at home. I woke up, went to the bathroom, and when I came back to our bedroom, my husband was watching TV in a very quiet volume, waiting for the race to start. I found it unpleasant and asked him to mute the TV until the race started. He said no. I asked again, and then he got up, got dressed, told me I was kicking him out of my bed when it was cold outside, and went to watch the race downstairs. The broadcast finished a few hours ago, but he's still mad at me. So Redditors, am I the asshole? Did I kick him out unknowingly, I guess? Am I the asshole for kicking him out of bed?
Why did she have to be in the room? Why didn't she go somewhere else? Like, okay, here's the thing for me, is it's like, it would be one thing to be like, hey, can I grab you your headphones? And offer to do that. Or like,
well, I was going to ask, when was this? Because it might have been when you couldn't put headphones to your TV.
But still,
last year.
Yeah, like
okay,
I'm sorry, but the race isn't even on yet and you're annoyed? Like,
it sounded like she would let him watch the race. It was pre-race, she wanted it muted. That was it.
I will openly say that my husband's first attempt at getting me into F1 did not work. And so while I wasn't clearly as annoyed by the sounds and things as this woman is, I can understand somebody being annoyed by the sounds of something. And I think if it's associated as something that is a father-daughter bonding experience, I can understand maybe having the expectation or rule that he's not going to watch it in their bedroom because their daughters aren't going to watch it in their bedroom with them. Maybe they would watch them in the living room. They have other TVs that he can watch on. If it's early in the morning, maybe she wants to go back to sleep, and that's what beds are for. Yeah. And so I don't really feel like she's the worst just because she doesn't like it. I mean, not everybody's going to like it. That's okay. And like, she seems to be she seems to tolerate it, and she seems to like understand why it's special to them. But I mean, I understand if there's something that's really annoying to listen to, I will just go crazy until I'm not listening to it anymore. So if it really bothers her, I mean,
most people can agree that she's not the asshole.
I kind of get it.
It sounds like they're
I don't think so.
in a situation where they don't have heat in the whole house. And that's why he was complaining about like going out into the cold and he had to go downstairs. But yeah, the consensus was that she's not the asshole. The bedroom is for sleeping.
I would say what makes the asshole for me is that the better thing to ask, I would have been, are you going to watch the whole race in bed? Like, establish, okay, are you only just like waiting for the race to start and then you'll go downstairs? It was the automatic assumption that like she deserved to be more comfortable in the bed than he did, and not having a full conversation about it and deciding where each of them would go. Like, that's what makes it kind of an asshole move on her part in my mind, is that she kind of just said, this is what I want to happen, and didn't have a conversation about it. Because either way, one of them has to compromise.
I don't think that she...
Like, not full asshole.
She didn't mind him watching it in bed. She just didn't want to listen to it. She asked him to
until it started. Like, once it started, it sounded like she would be okay with that there, too. So, welcome to Relationship Counseling with Gravel Trap.
We cover the spectrum. True. We have marriage, dating.
Now we have for our final story, very current event. Am I the asshole for not wanting to take my brother to the F1 race in Las Vegas later this year?
Definitely not.
This one's
cost
very
you a whole college fund.
interesting.
This seems fresh.
This one is fresh. This is from 3 months ago. For context, I'm a 19-year-old male. I was able to save up enough money to be able to buy 2 tickets and hotel room for the F1 race in Vegas this year.
Oh, wow.
I've been wanting to go to this race since F1 first announced it and been saving up money for it. Well, now that I have the tickets and hotel room, my parents want me to take my little brother, 13 years old. I tried explaining to them that I want to go with either one of my cousins or one of my close friends that are closer to my age.
Yeah.
I'm leaving it up to a raffle to decide who gets to go to make it as fair as possible. Well, now my parents, especially my mom, are demanding that I add my little brother to the raffle so he too has a chance of going to the race. Don't get me wrong. I love spending time with my brother. I love him to death. But I don't want to be responsible for him
in Las Vegas
at all times, and I don't want to have to pay for his food and expenses while over there. And to be honest, he's not a big fan of F1. I explained this to my mom, and she refuses to understand and is saying that I'm a terrible brother for not wanting to add my brother to the raffle.
Jeez. Obviously not the asshole.
Okay.
Like, come on.
I feel like they're your tickets that you bought with your money. So you have the freedom to decide who gets that other ticket, because guess what? They're a really lucky person that you're even giving them a free ticket to Las Vegas. That's so generous of you. You don't even have to do that much, I feel like. And even beyond that, I would say to my mom, I'd be like, if you want him to go so bad, buy him a ticket and buy him some hotel.
Yeah.
And he can hang out with me. That's fine. But I'm not paying for him to go, because and especially the whole he's not really a huge F1 fan thing. I'm like, if he was like a diehard, like has the posters on his wall, I would kind of be like,
yeah,
but don't you love your brother more than your friend? But if he doesn't even like it, and I understand a 19-year-old not wanting to be responsible for a 13-year-old in Las Vegas.
100%.
I actually feel like that's a really responsible move, Mom. He's being really responsible.
Like, very responsible. Not just that, but like going to Vegas when you're under 21 in general just seems like such a hassle. Like, yes, you're going there for a race and for a specific event. And so it, breaks down a lot of the barriers in that sense. But like, the Vegas experience is really like, it is catered to that specific age group where you can do the like very specific Vegas things. So it's kind of pointless to me in my mind to bring somebody that young who is just going to be there.
That's the consensus for everybody. And I actually responded to this one because I wanted to weigh in, because I have a background as an event planner, and I'm like, you're a 19-year-old kid on your own going to Las Vegas, who is now holding a tentpole event, the largest event this city has ever thrown in terms of size and scope and modification of the city and accommodations.
Yeah.
And it's the first year they're ever putting on said event. So the number of things that can go wrong, like think like all the complaints after the first year of Miami, think Firefest, think like they are converting this city into a theme park that places like Coda are built for. The things that could go wrong and it would be really difficult for a 19-year-old to try and navigate, not to mention the underbelly of Las Vegas and a 19-year-old being exposed to everything from mugged to being hoodwinked by some locals who know that tourists are coming to town. He's going to be a prime target. So do not take a 13-year-old with you, step one. Step two, take someone way older with you that may be able to navigate some hairy situations.
Yeah.
This goes wrong and we have to get out of town, or we have to go over, talk to these people, or I don't know. There's just so much that could go wrong in a first year event like this.
And bring somebody that's going to have your back. Don't bring, not that 13-year-old brother's not going to have your back. I'm sure he would, but I don't know that he'd be able to hold his own in having your back. Bring your cousin or your friend that's maybe
also
older than you.
It sounds like the mom didn't even ask the kid if he wants to go, which is like, really? You're going to be that parent? Like, such a red flag for mom right there. It's just like, why do you want this kid to go to this thing?
So
Those were good ones.
Those are the only 3 I could find on Reddit. So, listeners, if you have situations where you feel like there was some tension with somebody, feel free to hop on Reddit.
Feel free to share
and share it with the world because it's interesting.
We'll discuss your personal intimate details here on the podcast.
I'll put it in the Spotify Q&A. That'll be the Spotify Q&A. Is have you ever do you have an Am I the Asshole story that you want to share? F1 or not? Why not? Let's learn about you guys.
Yes, we love you guys.
True.
Speaking of love for them,
some of you guys have messaged me saying that you love the podcast, that you listen to it. And I just want to give you guys a shout out because while I am not the best at always responding to my messages because I just can't emotionally handle all of them, it doesn't mean I don't love you. I love you guys so much, and I love it that you love the podcast. And so I want to just take a moment to give that love to you guys, but I want to make sure I get everybody. And some of you guys, I don't know your name, so I'm just going to say your handle, the handle that you have on here. Of course, I feel like one of our A1 since day ones, Max Hiller. Yeah. You've been here repping the gravel trap since the very beginning. We see you, we know you, we love you. Thank you so much for listening. TJ, thanks for listening. So glad you're here. You are TJ_Chamberlain_11. So you know which TJ I'm talking about. Not that we have multiple TJs, but I'm sure there are a lot of TJs out there. Thanks so much for listening since June. So exciting. Glad you love the show. Aaron Machado, also known as Kamikaze Machado.
Fun name.
Thank you so much for listening. It is so much fun to have you here, and I appreciate the love. And D. Jolie, or unless that's your whole name, if it's Jolie with a D. Thank you so much for listening. We love having you here. And honestly, it's so fun to hear from you guys that you're enjoying the podcast because I don't want to speak for everybody here, but sometimes it feels like I'm just talking to Cristina and Buck and like no one listens to this. So it's really nice to know that you guys listen and you love it and you care, and we care about your feedback. We read it. We take it into consideration.
Yes.
I promise.
My whole wardrobe has changed since we got some feedback. No, not at all.
Really? Oh. I was like, the listeners have affected your wardrobe? I had no idea.
I want to give a shout out to Chris Lewis and Kevin Kelly. I think they are recent converts.
Nice.
But I've been messaging with them on Instagram. They're really cool.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Party.
Glad you're here. And we'll have to do this again, too, because I know that there are people that I'm missing, but I mean it when I say I love reading the messages where you guys reference something from the podcast or say that you love listening to the podcast. It's so fun. Another person that is an active listener of the podcast, David. I hope I say your last name right, David. I know we message all the time, but I've never spoken to you in person. So David Loynan, he's based in Austin, Texas.
Nice.
Really cool guy. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting. Big fan of you.
Nice.
And your dog.
Oh, love when they have dogs.
Me too. Like me. Anyways, thank you guys so much for listening to the Gravel Trap F1 podcast, and we'll see you next time after Japan.
Whoop, whoop. Meow.
Wait a second. How did I not know that you've read Sarah J. Maas? This is a big moment, people.
They're the background of every video, Caroline.